This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. We begin today's show in Syria, where tens of thousands of people have gathered at the Great Mosque of Damascus for the first Friday prayers since longtime authoritarian President Bashar al-Assad was toppled by opposition fighters.
Hopefully this Friday is the Friday of the greatest joy, a Friday of victory for our Muslim brothers. This is a blessed Friday.
Syria's new caretaker prime minister, Mohammed al-Bashir, was among those at the mosque. He'll act as prime minister until March. This comes as the World Food Programme is appealing to donors to help it scale up relief operations for the approximately 2.8 million displaced and food-insecure Syrians across the country. That includes more than 1.1 million people who are forcibly displaced by fighting since late November. Israel's defense minister has told his troops to prepare to spend the winter holding the demilitarized zone that separates Syria from the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Earlier today, Prime Minister Netanyahu toured the summit of Mount Haramun in the UN-designated buffer zone. Netanyahu said this week the Golan Heights would, quote, forever be an inseparable part of the state of Israel, unquote. On Thursday, United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for an urgent de-escalation of airstrikes on Syria by Israeli forces and their withdrawal from the UN buffer zone. In Ankara, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Turkey's foreign minister and the president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Blinken said the U.S. and Turkey would do to prevent a resurgence of the Islamic State group in Syria. Meanwhile, Erdogan told Blinken that Turkey reserves the right to strike the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces led by the Kurdish People's Protection Units, or YPG, which Turkey considers terrorist. For more, we go to Damascus for the first time since the fall of longtime authoritarian President Bashar al-Assad, where we're joined by the Associated Press investigative reporter Sarah El Deeb, who's based in the Middle East, a region she's covered for 2 decades. Sarah, welcome to Democracy Now! You are overlooking the square where tens of thousands of Syrians have gathered for the first Friday prayers since the fall of Assad. Describe the scene for us.
There is a lot of firsts here. It's the first time they gather on Friday after Bashar al-Assad fled the country. It's the first time everyone seems to be very happy. I think that's the dominant sentiment, especially people who are in the square. There's ecstasy. There's tens of thousands of people. They're still chanting down with Bashar al-Assad, but what's new is that it's also visible that the sentiment is they've been so far happy with the new rulers, not outpour. There is no criticism, loud criticism of the new rulers yet. So I'd say that the dominant thing is that everyone's happy down there.
Sarah El Deeb, you recently wrote an AP article headlined, "Thousands Scour Syria's Most Horrific Prison but Find No Sign of Their Loved Ones." On Tuesdays, families of disappeared prisoners continued searching Sednaya prison for signs of their long-lost loved ones who were locked up under Assad's brutal regime.
I will show you the photo of my missing brother. It's been 14 years. This is his photo. I don't know what he looks like if I find him. I don't know what he looks like because I am seeing the photos of prisoners getting out. They are like skeletons. But this is his photo. If anyone has seen him, can know anything about him, or can help us, he is one of thousands of prisoners who are missing. I am asking for everyone, not only my brother, uncle, cousin, and relatives.
Talk about this mad search by Syrians across the country.
This is the other scene that's been dominating our coverage and our reporting since we arrived here. The contrast between the relief, the sense of relief over the departure of Bashar al-Assad, but then the sadness and the concern and the no answers for where the loved ones have gone. Thousands, also tens of thousands of people have marched on Sednaya. It's the counter to this scene where people were looking for any sign of where their relatives have been. As you know really well, so many people have reported their relatives missing, tens of thousands, since the beginning of the revolt, but also before. I mean, I think this is part of the feature of this government is that there has been a lot of security crackdown. People were scared to speak, but because there was a good reason for it. They were picked up at any expression of discontent or expression of opinion. So where we were in Sydnaya 2-3 days ago, it feels like one big day, I have to say. When we were in Sydnaya, people were also describing what anything from the smallest expression of opinion, a violation of a traffic light, no answers, and they still don't know where their loved ones are. I mean, I think we know quite a lot from research before arriving here about the notorious prison system in Syria. There's secret prisons, there are security branches where people were being held. I think this is the first time we have an opportunity to go look at those facilities. What was surprising and shocking to the people, and also to a lot of us journalists, was that we couldn't find any sign of these people. I think, and the answers are, we're still looking for them, but what was clear is that only a handful, I mean not a handful, hundreds of people were found. Many of them were also found in morgues. There were apparent killing at the last hours of before the regime departed. One of them was the prominent activist, Mazen al-Hamada, that we were at his funeral yesterday. He was found, and his family believes that he was found killed, and his family believes his body was fresh. He was killed only a few days earlier. So I think the killing continued up until the last hour. I was wondering if you can tell us more about Mazen. I mean, I wanted to play a clip of Mazen's nephew, Yahya al-Hussein.
In 2020, he was taken from the Netherlands to Germany through the Syrian embassy there. And from there, they brought him to Syria with a fake passport. He arrived at the airport at around 2:30 a.m. and called my aunt to tell her that he arrived at the airport and asked for money. When they reached out to him the next day, they were told that air intelligence had arrested him.
That's Mazen's nephew, Yahya al-Hussein. Sarah, if you can explain, this was an activist who left Syria after he had been imprisoned and tortured more than a decade ago, but ultimately came back, apparently according to assurances that he would not be retaken, and now his body found. I mean, I think it's like you were saying, it's very hard to explain. This is someone who was very outspoken and was working on documenting the torture and the killing and the secret prisons in Syria. So he was very well aware of his role and his position vis-a-vis the government. Yet he felt it was hard to explain what Mazen's decision was based on, but his family believes he was lured into Syria by some false promises of security and safety. I mean, his heart was in Syria. He left Syria. It never left him. He was working from wherever he was. He was in the Netherlands. He was in the U.S. I think to expose these crimes, and I think these are the words of his family. He was a witness on the crimes of the Assad government, and he was a martyr of the Assad government. One of the people that were at the funeral yesterday was telling us Mazen was a lesson. The Assad government was teaching all detainees a lesson through Mazen to keep them silent. I think it was just a testimony to how cruel this ruling system has been for the past 50 years. People would go back to his father's rule also, but I think with the revolution, with the protest in 2011, all these crimes and all these detentions were just en masse. I think the estimates are for anywhere between 150,000 and 80,000 detainees that no one can account for. That is on top of also all the people that were killed in airstrikes and in opposition areas in crackdown on protest. So it was surprising that at the last minute, it was surprising and yet not very surprising. When I asked the family why did they do that, they would look at me and like, why are you asking this question? They do that, that's what they did. It was just difficult to understand how even at the last minute, and even for someone that they promised security, this would be the end. Initiated and tortured and killed, unfortunately. Sarah, you spoke in Damascus to a U.S. citizen, Travis Timmerman. who says he was imprisoned in Syria. This is a clip from an interview with Al Arabiya Thursday, in which he says he spent the last 7 months in a prison cell in Damascus.
My name is Travis.
Travis.
Yes.
So إذا وصلنا إلى شخص يدعى Travis Timmerman.
That's right.
That's right.
But just Travis. Just call me Travis.
Yeah, call you Travis.
That's
okay.
Travis.
And where were you all this time?
I was imprisoned in Damascus for the last 7 months. I was imprisoned in a cell by myself, and in the early morning of this Monday, or the Monday of this week, they took a hammer and they broke my door down. Well, the armed men just wanted to get me out of my cell, and then really the man who I stuck with was a Syrian man named Eli, who was also a prisoner that was just freed. And he took me by the side, by the arm really, and he and a young woman that lives in Damascus, and us three exited the prison together.
Sarah El Deeb, your AP report on Timmerman is headlined "American Pilgrim Imprisoned in Assad, Syria, Calls His Release from Prison a Blessing." What can you share about him after interviewing him?
I spent quite a bit of time with Travis last night last night, and I think his experience was very different from what I was just describing. He was detained for crossing illegally into Syria, and I think his description of his experience was that it was okay. He was not mistreated. He was fed well, I mean, especially when I compare it to what I heard from the Syrian prisoners in the secret prisons or in detention facilities. He would receive rice, potatoes, tomatoes. None of this was available to the Syrian detainees. He would go to the bathroom 3 times a day, although this was uncomfortable for him because, of course, it was not whenever he wanted. But it was not something that other Syrian detainees would experience. His experience also was that he heard a lot of beating and a lot of beating. I think that's what he described it as, beating from nearby cells. They were mostly Syrian detainees. For him, that was an implicit threat of the use of violence against him, but he did not get any, he was not beaten or tortured.
And
he
Sarah,
also said his release was a blessing.
If you could also talk about Austin Tice, the American freelance journalist. His family, his mother and father and brothers and sisters, seem to be repeatedly saying now that they believe he's alive, held by the Syrian government, and they're desperately looking for him or reaching out to people in Syria. What do you know?
What we know is that people thought Travis was Tice when they first saw him. They found him in a house in a village outside of Damascus, and I think that's what triggered. We didn't know that Travis was in a Syrian prison, so I think that's where everyone was going to check. They thought that this was Tice. I think the search, the U.S. administration, the family, they're all looking and determined to look for Tice. The family believes that he was in Syrian government prison. He entered Syria 2012. He was a journalist, but I think his family seem to think that he's still in the Syrian government prison, but I think so far we have not had any sign of Tice from all those released. But mind you, the scenes of release from prisons was chaotic, from multiple prisons at the same time, and we're still day by day finding out about new releases and people who were set free on that Sunday morning.
Finally, Sarah El Deeb, you've reported on the Middle East for decades. You just wrote a piece for AP titled, "These Palestinians Disappeared After Encounters with Israeli Troops in Gaza." So we're pivoting here. So much attention is being paid to the families of Syrians, prisoners who they are finally freeing. Want to turn to Gaza. Tell us about the Palestinians searching for their family members who went missing during raids and arrests by Israeli soldiers in the Gaza Strip, and talk about the lack of accountability for these appearances. You begin your piece with Rima Jour's quest to find her missing husband and daughter.
I talked to Majur for a long time. I mean, I think, like you said, this was a pivot, but the themes have been common across the Middle East, sadly. Majur last saw her family in March of 2024. Both her husband and her 5-year-old daughter were injured after an Israeli raid on their house during the chaotic scenes of the Israeli raids on the Shifa hospital. They lived in the neighborhood, so it was chaotic. They entered their home and they were shooting in the air, or they were shooting, and the family ended up wounded. But what was striking was that the Israeli soldiers made the mother leave the kid wounded in her house and forced her to leave to the south. I think this is not only Majur's case. I think this is something we've seen quite a bit in Gaza, but the fact that this was a 5-year-old and the mom couldn't take her with her was quite moving. And I think what her case kind of symbolizes is that during these raids and during these detentions at checkpoints, families are separated, and we don't have any way of knowing how the Israeli military is actually documenting these detentions, these raids. How do they account for people who they detain and then they release briefly? The homes that they enter, can we find out what happened in these homes? We have no idea of holding. I think the Israeli court has also tried to get some information from the military, but so far very few cases have been resolved. And we're talking about not only 500 or 600 people. We're talking about tens of thousands who have been separated, their homes raided during what is now 15 months of war in Gaza.
Democracy Now! Is funded by viewers like you. Please give today at democracynow.org/give.